The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to our quarterly webinar with XBOSoft. And today we're having a special guest speaker, Heidi Araya, and she's going to be talking about overcoming virtual challenges in an agile environment and working with remote agile teams. So we're really happy to have Heidi here. But before we begin, why don't we dive into, I think next will be the house rules. Actually, we're going to talk a little bit about XBOSoft. My name is Phil Liu. I'm the founder and CEO of XBOSoft, and we were founded back in 2006. And we were founded on the principle of really just doing software QA. So software QA is the only thing we do. We work with companies in executing in terms of actually doing the software testing, and we also work with companies in terms of trying to figure out how to improve their software quality. And a lot of times that turns out to be working on their processes and metrics and things like that, as well as how to fit Agile into quality or quality into Agile. So before we go on, here's some house rules. All the participants are going to be muted except for Heidi and myself. But you'll notice that on the GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen, you can ask lots of questions. So feel free to ask questions in the panel, and I will address them during the middle of the talk and interrupt Heidi and say, hey, there's a question coming in from the audience, and then we'll answer it during the webinar. And of course, if there's time afterwards, we can try to answer questions at the end as well. And don't forget, if you have to step away for a cup of coffee, you still will receive a recording of the webinar afterwards. And don't forget our hashtag today, which is Remote Agile. And if you want to go ahead and tweet that along with Heidi's Twitter handle as well as XBOSoft, that would be great. As I said, my name is Phil Liu. I'm the founder and CEO of XBOSoft. I just love doing these webinars because I get a chance to meet new people and learn a lot as well. And today we're lucky enough to have Heidi here. Heidi is, I met Heidi a couple years ago at a conference, and we just started talking a lot about Agile. And I think at that time I gave a talk on Agile risk management, and Heidi and I talked at length after the seminar that I gave. And Heidi works a lot as an Agile leader and coach at FishMe, and has worked with many other companies as well. So we're really glad to have Heidi here. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm so excited to be here. I've been working with remote and distributed teams since 1999, since way before it was cool. And back then we only had teleconferencing and chat was new. So I'm excited to show off the new tools that we've had in the years since, a little bit about my experiences, and as you can see, I am passionate about happy workplaces.
Happy is a good thing.
Happy is good. So today we're going to learn the different kinds of distributed teams, the common challenges and risks, as well as some benefits. And then hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll have some concrete tips, tricks, and solutions to facilitate your remote teams to get more engagement, understand how to gain agreement to work together, and increase togetherness on your remote teams. I would love to have a little poll. So if you wouldn't mind pasting in the chat from 1 to 4, if you have entirely co-located teams, I'm assuming since you're here, that might not be many of you. If you have 1 or 2 people in the team remote, but you're mostly co-located, so most everybody goes to an office every single day. Or you have some people co-located in multiple locations, like maybe various offices around the nation or the world. And then number 4 is entire team dispersed, where not anybody is in the same location. So just paste that in the chat, please. So while you're doing that, I'm going to talk about the Agile Manifesto because it's kind of imprinted in our brains if we've been doing Agile for a while. But if we dig into what it means to value the left side over the right side, we're valuing individuals and interactions over processes and tools. You can see how that would be easy to do in a co-located environment. But what if we never see the people that we work with? And the same with most everything here on the left-hand side. We're valuing people over other things. Collaboration and working software and responding to change. All of that requires trust, close collaboration, and great communication. So how do we make that happen in remote teams? And that's what I'm going to help you uncover some of those ideas today. Why do we even do remote work? First of all, I think it's the future of work, and it's just the way things are going to go. But diversity leads to innovation. If you can imagine a company in a mid-sized city where everyone went to the same local university, got similar degrees in technology, let's say, and has worked at all the same firms in the city, what sort of diversity and experience, education, and thinking patterns might you have? Definitely not as much as if you hire for diverse education, experience, culture, and so forth. It just encourages a ton more innovation and kinds of projects that we're working on today.
Hey, Heidi, the results are in, and it's really interesting. Primarily, it's number 3. Can you go back to the poll?
Yeah, some people co-located in multiple locations.
Wow, okay, multiple locations. Then we have a few 4s, mostly 3s.
Okay, great. Great to know.
So
thanks for that.
Number 1 rarely occurs. I see one number 1, which is entirely co-located, but everybody's pretty much spread out.
So there are some statistics that came out that only 12% of Agile teams are actually entirely co-located. So that's pretty interesting to see as well. Thanks for that. That's really helpful. That will help me tailor this a little bit. So when we think about across time zones, I know that we have some people at FishMe who are on pager duty. If we have global team, we might not have to have our team be on pager duty in the middle of the night. So we have easier extended customer service and support hours with the global team. We can hire specialists in their field. So if you think about the majority of specialists, let's say in artificial intelligence, might not be located in a medium-sized city, and you would have to convince them to move there even if they wanted to. So we have the ability to hire specialists if we don't require them to move to our location. And if you have a partner relationship, you get to share risks and knowledge with the partner that might be in another city. For a remote work perspective, I know I have less travel. I get to work at home all the time, except for when I'm doing training, and I might travel to an offsite meeting or for conferences and things, which I do quite frequently. But the rest of the time I'm home, that enables me to have a better life balance. I can still work out and cook and do the things that are important to me. So I'm definitely happier working from home. Definitely, there's been research that shows that employees are more loyal to those places that allow them to work remotely, even if it's not 100% of the time. That flexibility really does mean so much to everybody in our busy lives. And I, for one, know even if I'm not feeling 100%, I can still get my work done. It's not very physically challenging. So I have very few sick days at all, and I can't remember the last time I took a sick day. So there's tons of benefits to distributed work. Now I'm going to talk about the 3 kinds of distributed teams, and it seems like most people fall in the middle here with clusters, which teams in groups, but spread across a few locations. Okay, the other situation might be entirely co-located here, which we call a satellite, entirely co-located team with 1 or 2 people working remotely. And then the last situation, which these words I actually got from Mark Kilby, who's a great distributed Agile specialist, also living in Orlando, Florida, is called the nebula, where the whole team is dispersed and nobody's working in the same location. So you can visit his website there, and we'll share this information afterwards. But it seems like most of you are in the kind of situation where you're in clusters. What happens when we have this distributed team and we don't get this communication as easily as we would in a co-located? Of course, the first thing that we notice is that we have less high bandwidth communication, meaning we're relying on email and we're relying on chat, so we may not see each other's faces. There's a less opportunity to collaborate spontaneously because we can't just tap someone on the shoulder or walk over to their desk. Right now we have to plan our communications and schedule a meeting if they're not in the same location, or ping them and hope that they're available right when we want to chat, which doesn't always happen, especially if you have different time zones. We have potential cultural differences. So there are lots of outsourcing companies and even companies that have employees around the world, so we have to consider those cultural differences as well. When we don't get to spend enough time together, we have less of a chance to bond, and therefore that makes it harder to trust and empathize with people you've never met. If you've never met someone or have even seen their face, how likely is it that you'll be able to bond with that person or trust them? So again, implicit in Agile teams is the idea of trust, and to be professional, do the right thing, and do your job. And that's difficult if we don't feel like we really know that person. And the last one is what I call Learning by osmosis, which is just learning through overhearing or being in an environment. So when I walk into an office, I see billboards and I hear, let's say, people just having made a big sales deal. If I'm the Scrum Master, I might overhear my team discussing ways of handling potential challenges. You don't get any of that context in remote teams, especially in entirely distributed teams. So this is information that we are missing, and so we're going to have to find ways around that. With all this lack of context happening, right, leads to lack of empathy and understanding. How can you really empathize with someone if you haven't met them? Business is built on people and relationships. If we don't establish those, then the business won't survive. So it's all about people. So these are some problems I'll help you solve today. This lack of participation in meetings, misunderstandings, ability to resolve conflicts, and difficulty in expressing opinions and being open. And at the end of the day, all of those challenges end up in a reduced sense of ownership and commitment to the business and to the product and to your colleagues. So I'm going to talk about risks, and then I'll start talking about positive things. So I wanted to present you with the challenges, and then we're going to start talking about solutions so we can really focus on making things better. So I was talking about the lack of context about being in an office. I worked at a place previously where priorities changed really frequently. And in one place, it was almost entirely co-located, though we did have people working from home ad hoc whenever they wanted. The CEO would come in and announce a priority change. I just signed this huge deal. Stop working on what you're doing. We're going to work on these next features. If you could think about if we had to transmit that to another office via email, or if someone was just chatting, they might send a chat message like, stop what you're working on immediately, priority change. All of that context is lost. It might not end up looking to a happy moment to the other people who are losing context along the way, right? So it's often happened. The more distributed the team, the more confusion around priorities, because you don't get that context of going into an office and seeing those banners and hearing about the sales. So even from a product vision and mission and a business perspective, what are our business priorities? That context becomes to be more confused and lost. From the team perspective, what do I think about when I think of teamwork? I might partner with you and work on something together with you, sort of like pair programming. But in your mind, you might think, I'm going to work on something first and then pass it on to you afterwards. So the teams could have different ideas completely around what teamwork and collaboration mean, especially if there are time zone differences and cultural differences. So we have that going for us as a challenge, which could result in teams unable to be as effective, especially which happens so frequently in Agile teams, the product owner might be in one place and other stakeholders are separate, and then the team is in an entirely separate location. So I had a product owner in the San Diego, California area, and the teams that we had were all in India. And you can imagine if the teams, there's like 12.5 hours difference, had a question in the morning of their time, how long they would have to wait to get an answer from the product owner. So teams are unable to be as effective in that scenario. Different time zones make true collaborations difficult if it's really dispersed. And then, of course, you can imagine interdependent stories where that already reduces the ability to get things done, but having release planning and planning ahead with just entirely distributed teams or dispersed teams reduces ability to get things done. And so that will require more planning too. So I'm going to start talking about some solutions. Thinking about from the Agile team perspective, if you're a product owner, if you can tell the product owner, communicate the product vision relentlessly to your team. What does that mean? That means every single sprint planning, communicate the product vision. What are we here to solve? What are the challenges that I'm seeing? So don't assume the team will remember, because remember, we don't have that context around us every single day. Communicate priorities frequently to the team. Remind them what they're there to do, especially from a company perspective. What are the company's top priorities, and make sure that everybody's all on the same page, because it's easier to get off on different directions when we're all or mostly distributed. And then the next one is ensure your teams are set up for success. It's not that we don't do this, we don't intentionally do it, but if you are in a co-located environment, it's easy to assume that everybody understands Scrum. And again, you have a lot more context around, and the boards are visible, and you have people walking by. In a distributed environment, don't assume people know those things. I had someone reach out to me a few weeks ago asking me what the difference between an epic and a story was, and what a relationship was a spike. What is a spike, and what does that mean? So in my experience, every place does Agile a little differently. So even though someone has done Agile in their past and you hire them on and you assume the team is going to train them up, don't assume that they understand the whole process clearly. So it should be re-communicated and trained on how we do Agile in our environment and what's expected from them. The next thing is make sure to have the right roles readily available to the team. That means that you might have to share the pain across time zones. If the Scrum Master is separate from the team or the product owner is in a very different time zone, you might have find ways to work together. Make sure that there's a tech lead available to answer the team's questions in a real-time or almost real-time fashion. The distributed specialists say that you need 4 to 5 hours of overlap time per day to make distributed Agile really work well. So think about ways of sharing the pain here and there. And again, that may not be possible, but that's the best case scenario, is that minimum of 4 to 5 hours of overlap.
So,
and again,
so Heidi, does that mean, like, for instance, if the product owner is remote, then they just have to kind of change their working hours so they would at least have 4 to 5 hours of overlap with the rest of the team?
Yeah, there is. That would be the best case scenario. So there's something called share the pain, where if the team is distributed, it might be super early for one person some weeks, and then you rotate time zones. So you're kind of sharing the pain of the time difference there.
Right, I see.
Yeah. So, you can do it. And I think that's why, I mean, obviously distributed Agile is here. It's here to stay. These are just different ways of handling them. Other ways that people have begun to handle those challenges are try to co-locate teams in the same direction. So here we were talking about clusters of people. Is there, if that's the case, is there a way to get that team, let's say, not have all the QA people in India and all the developers in the United States, but mix that up? Maybe you want to have developers in QA on the same team in India and developers in QA on the same team in the United States. So there's various ways of handling it that we definitely want to have them as close as possible to get that communication. And then minimize cross-team dependencies and inter-team dependencies, like I was talking about. Is it possible to hire a QA person and a developer to work together in the same location? So do that where is possible. Otherwise, if you're working in an enterprise Agile setting where you have more than one team working on the same product, then try to minimize dependencies of stories and work that out ahead of time, because you can imagine in a distributed environment, it's hard enough in a co-located environment, but to solve those interdependent story challenges remotely becomes more complex. And the next one is watch for bottlenecks and work to alleviate them. And what does that mean? Agile assumes that we have specializing generalists, and it's really hard if you have, let's say, back end and front end in the same sprint, and you have a developer who's focused only on the back end and on the front end. It's how are you going to balance that sprint over sprint? The idea is have someone specialize in one area but also be able to fill in, or bring skill sets inside your team to minimize those dependencies and handoffs wherever possible.
Hey, Heidi, I'd just like to go back to that minimize cross-team dependencies, because you had talked about stories being interdependent, but sometimes it's just unavoidable to have stories that are totally independent.
Absolutely, it is. So sometimes if we do, well, we should be doing some forecast planning and release planning ahead, and in that way you can say, well, this one is dependent on this, so can we split it this way and have this team work on it in a previous sprint, and then have that team work on it in the next sprint. So depending on the product, there are various ways to handle it. And then sometimes you just can't avoid it, and so then you need to sort of coordinate that collaboration and know it's coming ahead of time. Just don't have it surprise you. I had teams that one team was working on something inside the sprint that changed, and they were using the same environment. And so one team was developing for something, was like, hey, the API's changed. I wasn't expecting that, so it broke their code. And at the end of the day, if we don't watch for those dependencies and plan for them, then appropriately, I want to say, plan for them appropriately, then it will really grind the teams to a halt. And that's actually what happened after about 8 or 9 months at this other company I worked with.
So I guess for an interdependent story, you have to explicitly acknowledge that it is such a type of story and attack it a little bit differently.
Yeah, that would go with hopefully in some sort of release planning or looking ahead a couple of sprints. The team should be looking ahead like 2 to 3 sprints and determining those dependencies ahead of time. In most Agile tools, you can tag dependencies, but definitely start planning for ways that we can handle them.
Yeah, a question came in that's kind of related to this, and you talked a little bit about that with a co-located team that you could have osmotic learning, whereas with a distributed team, that's a little bit difficult. So what other ways of learning are there that have to be, I guess, a little bit more purposeful than osmotic learning?
Yeah, definitely. I think I will
Maybe.
be addressing some of those as we go along.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be, yeah, definitely I'll be uncovering them. So I haven't answered some of the ways by the end, then remind me at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to give you one key idea, some teams have team rooms where they then have video open, so they can kind of see each other. That's just one of the ideas, though. So stay tuned, and we'll talk about more of those.
Okay.
So next, don't forget, retrospectives and open communication are key to uncover challenges. These are just some of the challenges and solutions I've presented here, but your teams undoubtedly have more. So make sure to bring those up in your retrospectives and encourage open communication. For one new team, I think they had finished their second sprint, and I was in their office visiting, and I asked how things were going. They didn't come up with many improvement ideas, and they were saying, no, everything's fine. Yep, we're just kind of used to working together. And then I asked, if I had a magic wand, what would you ask for? And the guy blurted out, almost without thinking, if I had a preview environment, I could deliver twice as fast. And so that was amazing. So just ways of facilitating and opening communication to uncover challenges. Okay. So there are tips for handling distributed communication. And again, I want a shout out for Mark Kilby. These are his graphics and his verbiage too. These have been super helpful for me. So imagine that there's a meeting in the head office, which I cannot attend. I had them set up a video session, so we're supposed to join on Skype, but that link isn't working for me for some reason. Now they're all in that meeting on Skype without a way for me to tell them I'm having a problem. The back channel to the rescue. The back channel means that we have a separate tool to communicate. In our case, we use an app called Slack, so I can send a message letting them know something isn't working. So that's a solution for this particular problem of technology not working, because we have to prepare for that in remote Agile teams. And another example related to that, during the meeting, we're all talking in a room, but there are some remote people. How can they participate if all we have is the voice open? And at best case, we have a laptop set up in the room that's facing away from the people so they can see a whiteboard on our video that we're writing on. But let's say they can't see the whiteboard or they have a question. So buddy system to the rescue. Each remote person has a buddy in the room that they can send a chat message to speak out for them, ask questions, and provide feedback. And this kind of paired communication has been super helpful for me in my training and my sessions as an Agile coach too. And the third one is the co-pilot. So I was doing some Kanban training, and some people were in the room, but some people were in a remote office in India. So I had actually printed out some materials for the people in the room, but how could I do that and set up the room for people in India, because we needed markers and we needed stickies. So I found someone in the office in India willing to help facilitate, and I emailed the materials to that person, who was able to print them out, coordinate the room, set up the laptop, get the markers and stickies and so forth. I could then facilitate the session remotely, and he helped me coordinate in that remote location. So if you have a situation like that, there are these coordination tips that we could do. So what if online meetings are kind of new for you and your company, and you're just getting started? The first thing I want to say is use the very best tools. Remember that you're replacing everyday channels of communication with seeing people, and you're not being co-located anymore. So use video, and I'll talk about how to get people to use video a little bit more as we go along in this talk. The next thing is, if one person is remote, everyone is remote. That means we make remote people first-class citizens. I had worked in a location where most people were co-located, but they had some consultants that would go home on Thursday evening, so they worked remotely on Friday. And previously, they had just one dial-in number, and everyone huddled around the phone and tried to talk, but the stand-up was so large that that person on the phone really couldn't get anything out of the stand-up, so it was a waste of their time. So I instituted dial-in Fridays. Everyone, even if you were in the office, would dial in to the call to make sure that the people who were remote could hear everybody. So that's how we got around that. So the best practice is, if one person is remote, everyone is remote. Make communication equal and fair so everybody can hear each other. And it also shares the pain. If you're used to a co-located environment and you're used to impromptu meetings, imagine that you have that satellite kind of situation where you have most people co-located, but only 1 or 2 people away from the team. And the habit is for everybody to just have impromptu decisions and meetings. You need to sort of include everybody. So it might delay your meeting, and that might delay some decisions, but include everybody and make sure that they are definitely a part of your team, because if you begin excluding them and making them feel like they're an afterthought, it's going to sort of make them not as efficient and productive, of course, and they're going to feel left out. If your team is so widely distributed that you just can't get on the same time zone at the same time, you're going to have to learn with a way of dealing with asynchronous communication. One example might be we use Slack, which is a great chat system for communication. And one of my teams in the past, they had asynchronous stand-ups. So they would just post what they did yesterday and what they're working on today and what they hope to finish asynchronously in a chat channel. So that can happen too. So again, we can say there's ideal, but we live in the real world, so we have to learn to handle these things. And then if you're just getting started, you can imagine that if you're not used to getting on video and joining, that people might forget to put themselves on mute. But if you have a lot of people joining the call, at least 1 or 2 people in the background have lots of noise going on, so mute when you're not speaking. And the last one is, again, especially if you're not entirely a distributed team and you have, within the sense of being the nebula, and you have some people who are not in your same office, find ways of socializing online, not only at the water cooler. So again, I'll share some of these tips as we get going, but these are some best practices if you're just getting started with remote meetings.
Heidi, a question came in relevant to the most effective tools that you found that you use for some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So personally, I'm a huge fan of Zoom. Zoom is cheap. I think it's, well, there's a free version of Zoom, which you can have meetings up to 45 minutes with video and voice, and up to 50 people, I think. And then there's the paid version, which is $14.95, and you can have unlimited meetings and up to 100 people. So those are some of the best tools. And of course, I recommend Slack. So I have a resources page at the very end of this webinar where I share the tools. Those are just the best ones that I've found so far is Zoom. And of course, Google Hangouts is okay, but I still prefer Zoom over Google Hangouts. Okay. All right. So how do we even lead effective meetings? Imagine that you need to lead an effective meeting and that you're kind of new to this and you're not sure. Well, having the meeting itself is only a part of the work, so you need to think about it ahead of time. Before you even start the meeting, you need to have an agenda and share expectations for outcomes. For an example, we were talking about core values, and so I was going to send out a meeting invite about core values. Imagine if I had just sent out the title saying core values and asked people to join my meeting. They would be really unsure about, are they supposed to be providing core values? Am I already telling them what the core values are? You can imagine the confusion, so they wouldn't be able to even come to the meeting prepared in any way, shape, or form. So share expectations for outcomes and have an agenda. So in the agenda, I shared them that the outcome of the meeting was not to create the values, but to agree how to come up with shared values and how to get the company to align on them jointly. So put context in your meetings. It's so important when you send out an agenda. Then if you have any materials to send out in advance, previously, you could just print them out and hand them around, and then people could mark up the values in the meeting, but we can't do this in distributed situations. So we need to prepare ahead, send out any materials in advance, and make sure you send them out in advance in enough time for people to be able to review them ahead of time. So this is going to take a little bit of a mindset shift for people who are used to just doing everything last minute. Inside the meeting, so I've got this box. What's inside the box here is actually the stuff that happens inside the meetings. And I'll go, some of these have more in-depth notes that I'll go into. But for now, just think about time boxing discussions, stick to that agenda that you sent out. If you're facilitating and you're presenting, have someone help you take notes on the things like action items. So when you have your action item and someone is agreeing to do something and you're presenting, then have someone else help you take notes and make sure that all those action items have owners. So now that the meeting is ended, you're not done yet. Well, right before the meeting, or you can even do it in an anonymous survey, if you really want to improve your meetings, get feedback on them. Ask people to vote on the meeting effectiveness. And if you're using video, you can just do a show of hands, 1 to 5. How effective was this meeting? 1 for least effective and 5 for most effective. And you can get feedback on how to make your meetings better because everyone is different. And then don't forget, of course, to follow up on your action items. I followed this at at a meeting and at my current company, and at the end of that meeting, the person told me, this was the most effective meeting I had been in all week. So preparation really is important. Who here have been in online meetings where no one wants to say anything? Well, I've been in those too. So I have some solutions for you. First of all, usually in those meetings, no one turns on their video. So this is what I did. Look at my hair. I created some really crazy hair and I turned on my video. So I created some Pippi Longstocking hair and I stuck some wire in there and my braids were bobbing around. So I turned on my video. Everybody started laughing and then people started turning on their video one by one. It was our icebreaker. You could have different icebreakers. What did you have for dinner last night? What's your favorite color? If you Google it, there's a ton of icebreaker questions. But look, one of our icebreakers is hats and masks. So having those kind of icebreakers really gets kind of people talking, and it makes you think of each other as people, not just worker bees who you're working with, right? So if you have lack of engagement in your meetings, use video, have good lighting, and start with those icebreakers. Even if you're the only one who's turning on your video, if you'll start and do something funny and sort of out of the ordinary, maybe you arrive early to build in some personal time. So I actually started doing that. I arrive a few minutes early when I have the time to my other meetings, and I turn on my video, and then if someone shows up, I'll just say, oh, hey, I like your red shirt, or whatever happens. We can start talking about personal things, or, you know, my cat might be jumping up on my computer. So arriving early to build that personal time really does help engagement inside of meetings. If people still aren't beginning to talk, ask some open-ended questions. So for example, I could say, hey, Matt, what did you think about the core value that we're proposing on quality? And hope for some answer, right? Or call in individuals if they're silenced. It'd be really hard for somebody not to answer if you're directly calling on them. Hey, Phil, what did you think about that? Another one of my favorite ways to encourage engagement in meetings, especially if you have lots of introverts who are really shy to express their opinion, is just ask one question, pick one question, and then do rounds to ensure that everybody has a chance to speak. And you might get input like, hey, in the beginning, I thought that was a good idea, but after hearing what Matt said, I'm not so sure. I kind of agree with him now. And you'll see that even the introverts and shy people will have a chance to speak, and it really will change the conversation. So a little bit later in this presentation, I'll go a little bit more in depth around how to get people to speak up in meetings and stuff. We might assign and rotate meeting roles if it's a repeating meeting, which is also a great way to handle if you're on vacation and people are used to assigning and rotating those meeting roles. So you're not always the same people presenting. And so like this webinar is perfect. And I love when I'm getting interrupted because one-way presentations do not drive lots of engagement. So keep one-way presentations to a minimum and stop and ask for input from people and see what they say.
Interrupt you again, Heidi.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one of the attendees is talking about digital Kanban boards. Have you used those before?
Yes, absolutely.
Is there like a certain manufacturer or you know, a brand that you've used before that you like, or?
So actually, there's a really great tool called ScrumDo, and it's not very well known, but it's a really inexpensive tool that you can do actually enterprise planning with Kanban. So I recommend a tool called ScrumDo.
Okay, is that Scrum with DO, you mean?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
So if you don't have one and you have ability to choose one, then check that one out. And what I actually really like about that one is that it has team happiness meter inside that. So yeah, actually you can tell how happy your teams are. And it's a great collaboration tool for virtual teams. So that's actually one of the better collaboration tools because it builds your sort of, obviously the work management inside of the team engagement tool. And I really like that one. It's the only one that really thinks about that kind of thing. Of course, I've used Jira for years.
Right.
The other tools like, you know, Rally and version 1 are popular. But sometimes it's a little guy that has the features.
Yeah,
so,
one other comment that just came in that's kind of related to this slide because you're talking about trying to get introverts to contribute more of their ideas because sometimes introverts actually have some of the best ideas. But they also talk about the cultural differences, and maybe some folks in a different country may not feel that comfortable, speaking out. And how do you encourage them to participate and get their ideas as well?
Yeah, absolutely. What a great question. I actually added a slide last night because I was thinking it's just too important to have one line here talking about working agreements. So when I come to the working agreement slide, we'll talk a little bit about that. So
Okay.
culturally, I guess it's not only it's not a simple solution, but that's one place to start where you get everybody on the same page around how you work together. So I'll be coming to that shortly.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, who in this call has had a difficult stakeholder? What I say is the more difficult the meeting, the more preparation is needed. I used to strategize, in fact, with another coach on how to handle a difficult stakeholder who derailed conversations when she didn't like what was being said. So she would do anything to derail the conversation if she didn't like the direction. And so how do you handle those kind of people? We started out meetings by reviewing our planned agenda, including the expected outcomes, and then we asked her for her buy-in. And then she would say, okay. And so she's just bought into our plan for this meeting. She would still try to derail the meeting sometimes, but then we had a parking lot for this off-topic discussions and questions. Yeah, that's a great idea, Mary. Let's put it in the parking lot to discuss before we finish this meeting. If the person just talks and talks and talks, then keep to time. So have a planned budget for how long each item will take. And again, this will require a little bit more work than just kind of ad hoc meetings. But if you're having trouble getting stuff done because maybe the meetings were supposed to last 1 hour and they start lasting 3 hours, start trying to keep to time. And especially in a sense where a stakeholder might be a difficult person, have a facilitator to help you. Instead of you breaking in and saying, oh, we only have 10 minutes left, have the facilitator break in and say, hey, I'd still like to talk about this topic. And so get some help with your facilitation. And the last is the ELMO cards. ELMO stands for enough, let's move on. So you have meetings that derail and go on and on, have a common signal. And one of them you can use is these ELMO cards where if you're using video, you can just hold them up, say, hey, enough, let's move on. And I got this idea from Lisette Sutherland from collaborationsuperpowers.com, and you can download those cards. You can buy them or download them and print a set for yourself and use them in your meetings. All right, so I gave you some tips. And those were pretty easy. But now there's the hard part. We need to recreate virtually some of those conditions: collaboration, communication, trust. We need to encourage empathy, promote understanding, be appreciative, and encourage constant feedback, which are the things that we need to encourage in distributed and remote environments, just the same way that we would do in a co-located culture. So for encouraging empathy, easiest to say and hardest to do sometimes, of course, is to meet in person every so often. There's just no replacement for meeting people in person, spending time together, having dinner or lunch together. But that's one of the first solutions that everybody jumps to, and I assume that you know that. So we'll just move to the next items in the list, but keep in mind that you should do that if there's any way possible to do that. So random pair buddies. Imagine you go to an office every day. Who do you see? When you walk in, you might see the receptionist, colleagues from all kinds of departments, from executives to salespeople, legal, human resources, and you might discover by their clothing that they went to the same university you did, they love the same sports team, or that they have cats or dogs if you see the hair on their coats. So you discover all kinds of things about them. But how do we do that in a distributed environment? Well, there's something called Random Pair Buddies, and we actually installed at FishMe this app called Donut, and it pairs people together randomly. So it knows whom you've chatted with and who you haven't, and it pairs people randomly every other week, and you get together with that person on video. So this week I met with someone from compliance that I'd never actually have run into in my normal day-to-day work, but this really increases engagement across the company. Everybody's really happy with it, and encourages empathy, because remember, it's all about the people. No work will really get done if we have no empathy for our colleagues, because why would we want to help them if we don't really care about them at all, right? So make it about the people. Another way is to schedule or find personal time. So I touched on that. Join meetings early and turn on your camera. If you can't find the time to join meetings early, then maybe you want to schedule personal time for your team. Like I have a team that every Friday afternoon at 4:30, I think they get together for 30 minutes to just turn on their cameras and chat about whatever they want to chat about. So those things are super important, because you would have those things happening in an office anyway. Another thing is find channels for common interests. And so again, we use a tool called Slack, and I highly recommend it. There is actually a free version, and so you can get started right away and see how it works for you. We have channels for pets. We have channels for food, for working out in the gym, Python programming, and people can ad hoc set up new channels of interest. And so you can see here where people are posting pictures of their cute pets and people are reacting to it. So that really increases engagement, and it encourages bonding across the company, which is what we're really, again, we're here to recreate what we can't have in person when we're working in an office together. So helps bonding a lot. And then when you have a new team member join, reach out to them, make sure that everybody reaches out to them and welcomes them, and welcome them in front of everybody, and make sure that they feel welcome and that everybody's aware of their role, because again, you might miss that context. If that person were to show up in an office in a co-located environment, they would get taken to lunch by some people and everybody would get to know them. But in this, we have this reduced context, so welcome them and make sure everybody knows what their new role is. Okay, now we're going to talk about promoting understanding. And so with the person's question around how do we get people to speak up? And I've had this problem pretty extensively across cultures and across teams, because depending on the culture, one particular teammate might be more outspoken than another one. I had some, let's say, some Russians working together with some people from India and some people working together from Eastern Europe and Western Europe. So we all have different ways of expressing ourselves. And so when you have that, it's super important to develop something called working agreements. I have a slide share on working agreements, and so you're happy to go ahead and download that and use those for your team, but I highly recommend it. Where did this come from? Google studied 50 years of data and 180 teams for years. Why? Because they were trying to figure out the makeup of the perfect team, what made a perfect team, and they couldn't figure it out for years. Eventually, they concluded, quite by accident, that what distinguished the good teams from the dysfunctional groups was how teammates treated one another. So when you think about going to the office and spending time with people, team norms happen. It's kind of the behavior that begins to be expected. For example, I have a person on one of my teams that always plays music before the demos. So that's the norm. It's Cody picks the, Cody is the DJ for the demos. So it's part of being in a group of humans. It's implicit understandings of what people do, what they can do, what they should do, must do. And so whether or not you think about these norms are being developed, and working agreements are a way to establish agreement around how we're going to work together. How this might work in a work environment is we all agree to participate fully. So they're positive behaviors. If you have people always arriving late to meetings because perhaps that they have other meetings or they don't really think it's important enough to arrive always on time, for whatever reason, we might talk as a group and come to agreement on it's important to be on time and end meetings on time, perhaps to have an agenda. I had a team who came up with an agreement that they were going to do 1 hour of code reviews a day. So basically, it's an agreement that the team gets together to discuss. If you have team members like I have had in the past who are very quiet and don't want to participate, now we've just agreed all together jointly that we all agree to participate fully, then I think it would mean that they would hopefully begin to participate fully because they bought into that idea and they agree on how important it is. And actually the discussions that I had around the working agreements were really valuable themselves. So it wasn't only just establishing the working agreements, but even having those discussions around the working agreements that ended up being really valuable for the team to understand. Like I was talking about teamwork. When I say teamwork, I mean, we want to work on it together the whole time. And you think I'm going to do it first and then hand it on to you. So getting on the same page around what those things mean. So I encourage you to look that up. The other thing that is extremely useful for your company as an organization is a core values or culture deck. So why are we here and what we represent? And that gets people all on the same page around what our vision and mission is and why are we actually working for this company? What is it about this product that's gonna make us successful? And the examples I put here are for the software development organization. So if you can't do it for the whole company, think about your team or your group. What are your core values? And so those are 2 ways that you can get people a little bit more engaged. The next thing is we want to be appreciative and recognize contributions. And it's so easy to say, you know, thanks, man, or, you know, great job if you're in person. But how do you do that in a distributed environment and have people hear those things and understand those things? So at the place I work right now, we use something called High Ground, which integrates right in a Slack channel, but you don't have to use High Ground. You can just use Slack or whatever tool you use for your distributed team communication, but you should have a team room. And so this idea of a team room where people post comments in their team room is another idea for engagement, to get people all on the same page around that context that's missing, which was the question that somebody had, which is, I can hear people and I can hear the challenges that they're working on, but if we have this team room open and we are posting the things that we're working on and the challenges that we're solving and any little emotion about the work we have, that gives additional context. So it won't replace all of that other context, but it's a start. And, we have to find ways around those things. So definitely encourage team rooms and channels. What they're called in Slack is channels. So you could simply have a channel called, or a team room called thanks. You post thanks in there, however you decide to do it. So at FishMe, we have a Slack channel called thanks, and we post our thanks and we get points. So we can earn points to buy socks or Amazon gift cards and things like that. And there's also kudobox.co, and there's an example here, a screenshot. So you can either print those out or email them to say thanks to people, but the idea is hopefully make it as public as possible to give kudos so people know what people, the hard work that people are putting into their work and the passion that they have around their work. I've also had teams who want to use a humble brag channel. So what if you did solve a really big business problem and nobody knows about it? Well, figure out a humble brag channel and post it in there. So these are ways of being appreciative and recognizing contributions of people from the team.
Heidi, before you go on, we have a question that came in.
Yeah.
Can you explain the random pair buddies once again and how to use the Donut app?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called Donut. I think it's donut.ai or something is a thing. So it is a plugin for the Slack app that will people join, let's say, one particular channel. So in our case, we named the channel Coffee Buddies. So people it's not required, but you decide you want to join the Coffee Buddies channel because you would like to meet people. And then anybody in that channel gets paired with somebody random that they haven't spoken with every other Monday at 10 a.m. And so it'll send you a message, you and the other person a message saying, hey, I've just paired you up, so find a time to chat. And it's just taken off with huge success. So that's something I super recommend.
That's interesting. So it's kind of like creating a gamification of having people talk to each other in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the past 6 months, I've had people express to me that they wanted to talk to people and know where people are located around the country and the world, and they didn't have this opportunity to talk to anybody outside their team. But right. Yet we're all part of the same company. We're all part of the same mission. And it was kind of like, how do you draw these people together and create empathy across the organization? And so, yeah, look up Donut app for Slack, and in the Google search, it should come up right away, but we found it super helpful.
Great.
Okay, so encouraging constant feedback. Everyone should encourage constant feedback. This is the only way to know what specific challenges you're having, and I mean management too. Okay, so we have retrospective on focus topics. Sometimes, for example, I might have a retrospective on the challenges we're having with our environments, or some other, hey, how did this project go at the end? How did this initiative go, and how could it have gone better? We have retrospectives on when we mess up in the hiring process somewhere. Management should be involved in constant feedback too, because we're not just having them push instructions down to us. This is more like a collaborative way of getting people involved, and especially in a distributed environment, a manager might be in a completely different location, unaware of the challenges that the team is facing. In this anonymous polls, surveys, input, and feedback methods, the screenshot I have on the right-hand side is in an app called Idea Boards. That's ideaboards with a z.com, and you can see it. We were considering restructuring the teams, and so I created an idea board saying, hey, what are our current challenges? What are your ideas for improvement? And then what are other considerations around the team restructuring that we might want to take into consideration before we decide to restructure the teams? And so everybody went in there, and they, you can vote up ideas to talk about them. And so there's a ways of getting feedback methods, and there are other ways, like pollmaker.com is free, surveymonkey.com is free. If you're talking about online retrospectives and remote retrospectives for distributed teams, then there's a tool called Retrium, which has been extremely helpful for use and that we use at FishMe. People appreciate that their opinions are valued, and it will increase engagement in your teams. Okay. All right. So here are the recommended resources. And again, this is on my SlideShare. This presentation is on my SlideShare account. You can see the working agreements SlideShare. You can download the collaboration superpowers supercards. I also have a leading effective meetings, which gives you more tips for leading those effective meetings in SlideShare. A link to icebreaker questions in case you're not sure what to ask, boards and polls. And so there's a ton of information here for you. But yeah, I'm willing to take more questions if you guys have any.
Yeah, Mark brought up that in his team he uses Appreciation Station. Have you heard of that? Appreciation Station?
Okay, I've heard of it, but I've never used it.
Yeah. And then Jeff has another question. I guess he says he doesn't have any distributed team members now, but he wants to learn how to do it better. And he's wondering, is there anything that he can do to become a better remote coach or facilitator to kind of practice these? I guess he's probably thinking that it will come up very soon.
Right, actually. So I would start with the idea of finding some really good tools and making sure that right off the bat, when you set up remote teams, they get in the habit of turning on video. So right away, I would get some sort of video software going like Zoom. And then as he engages those remote people, make it the expectation that they should be turning on their video and using the video, because it's a lot easier to start off using video and making those assumptions than to try to correct it when people have had years of using, let's say, Skype without turning on their video cameras. So start with the right habits and the best practices that I talked about, and hopefully it will go easily.
Yeah, I think the video definitely makes it certainly a lot more engaging. You can't not participate, right? You have to be there 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Less ability to multitask and not pay enough attention. So for some, I mean, some of the tips, let's say if the bandwidth won't sustain 50 people having their video all at the same time, you can't even see 50 people on video at the same time. So you might do first 5 minutes, last 5 minutes of video, or even whoever is speaking has their video on. And if you're not speaking, you turn your video off. And if you want to start to say something, then you turn on your video. So there's lots of little tips and tricks that you can use with video.
Yeah. Okay, well, great. We don't have any more questions. Let me see. One more here. I'm wondering the best etiquette in dealing with people in different time zones. So the question is, how do you negotiate that? And I think you mentioned earlier on about trying to share the load, right?
Yeah, I would suggest, discussing, let's say, the hours of overlap that you have right now. Let's say we only have 2 hours of overlap right now. I would love to have more overlap time. So can we think together as a team on how to share the load and maybe collaborate better together? So I would actually get the team together and ask them to help solve the situation so you can come to an agreement with everybody.
Yeah, this person says, what if I have a critical question and I post it on something like on Slack, and then I just have to wait, I guess, right, until they come back. I guess that would be, an 18-hour delay or whatever the delay is, right?
So those things will always happen, and think about if you have ways of handling them. So is there another person that you could potentially go to in line? So if you think ahead about those challenges that might come up and have ways of dealing them, like if this person is not available, then I should go with this other person. But to be honest, if that person is the subject matter expert and you have to wait for them, then it's the cost of doing business. And that's why we say, if at all possible, make them as close together as possible with at least that 4 or 5 hour overlap, because otherwise it gets really, really challenging.
Right. Okay. Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions. There have been a lot of questions today, and I'm really excited that it was, as interactive as it's been, Heidi. And
yeah,
really glad to have you here today and share your knowledge, and really appreciate you spending an hour and talking to us.
absolutely.
Just for those that are listening in on the webinar, we will post the slides as well as the recording, and you can follow us on any of the social channels to find out more information about future webinars that we may have, or other things that we're going to be doing in conferences and so forth. So thanks a lot, Heidi, and thanks to our audience, and look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Have a great day.